At the center of the table, like the epicenter of an unseen storm, a wine glass continued its slow dance. Its elegant stem served as the axis of rotation, but this movement wasn't caused by a touch. In a fit of anger, she had slammed it down with such force that the base spun, as if trying to break free from the smooth surface, much like she yearned to escape the agonizing scene itself. "Say it," her voice, laced with venom, seeped through clenched teeth. An unnatural flush colored her cheeks, not from wine, but reflecting the raging fire of anger and disappointment within. Fury blazed in her eyes, each word seemingly torn from the depths of her soul. Moments ago, the restaurant had been filled with a muted hum of voices and the clatter of dishes, but now a tense silence enveloped it. Formally, they were still at the table, but in essence, they were no longer truly present in that cozy establishment. Neighboring tables began to cast curious glances, as strangers often do when witnessing the unraveling of something personal and intimate. Their curiosity was almost palpable, like static electricity in the air, portending something inevitable. What would happen next, and what words would be spoken? His gaze involuntarily drifted to Ryan, who sat opposite him like an unperturbed statue amidst the rubble of their shared world. His elbows rested confidently on the table, and his shirt seemed to strain, accentuating the audacity of his entire demeanor. Every movement, every expression, exuded that particular brand of confidence unique to those who feel no remorse for the pain they inflict. He brazenly met his gaze, offered a crooked grin, and took another bite of bread, as if savoring a romantic evening, while the narrator was relegated to the role of an accidental observer. "You embarrassed him," she hissed, as if he'd caused a child's minor upset at a party. "You need to apologize." He remained still, the air seeming to thicken, pressing down on his lungs with an invisible weight. Just 2 hours ago. This evening was supposed to be their private celebration, a cozy table by the window, flickering candle light, promising warmth and a chance to rekindle their lost connection. The reservation had been made a month in advance, every detail meticulously planned, every minute eagerly anticipated. Yet there was no gratitude, no appreciation for the ambiance, not the slightest acknowledgement of his efforts. Instead, she simply brought him. Without explanation, without warning, she casually stated, "Ryan is joining us. Hope you don't mind." He took the spot where the candelabra should have been, obscuring the intimate glow meant for just the two of them. And there she sat before me, as if petrified, not appealing for my leniency, but with the aplomb of a mentor, demanding an apology for the insolent man who had brazenly shattered our idyll, as if he were a person of special privilege. In response, I burst out laughing, not from the humor of the situation, but from its sheer tragicomedy. The laughter was born more from the shock of the absurdity, from the realization that she was, without blinking, ready to disregard our recent agreements as if they were meaningless. And deep down, I understood that the root of the problem lay within myself, in my weakness for letting this charade go so far, in my inability to stop this masquerade at its very beginning. In a single decisive motion, I rose. There were no histrionic shouts, no bitter tears, no urge to overturn the table, though the impulse was almost irresistible. Calmly, yet loud enough for every word to reach them, I delivered my ultimatum. Choose now, him or me. her face contorted in astonishment, as if she couldn't fathom I possessed such resolve, such a will to resist. Ryan, still chewing impassively, merely offered a slight smirk, as if my remark had added a piquant note to his dull evening. Without waiting for her answer, I turned and left the place, my heart pounding, my hands feeling icy, and my mind torn by conflicting questions. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't stay here any longer. And what happened next, let's just say, she made her choice, but she had no inkling that I already knew everything. No idea what I had seen, and certainly no clue about my future plans before he'd gone far. He sank onto a bench opposite, staring at his faint reflection in the darkened restaurant window. He could still make out their figures, she, visibly agitated, crumpling her napkin, while Ryan stretched languidly, like a victor who had just hit the jackpot. In a naive hope, he expected her to rush out after him. He waited 5 minutes, then 10. At one point, he even reached for his phone, his finger hovering over her name, but he never pressed it. Instead, he scrolled through his gallery to a photo taken earlier that day, a photo he shouldn't have seen. It is worth noting that what happened wasn't to bolt from the blue. He hadn't shared this with her, but he had long been noticing red flags, minor slips of the tongue, inconsistencies in her stories. Then there was the sudden change in her phone wallpaper from their shared photo to a quote about freedom. He wasn't proud of what he did, but he did something he'd never done before. He looked through her shared photo album with Ryan. She'd overlooked disabling the sync, and there it was, a photo of the two of them on a bar rooftop 2 weeks prior. She was wearing the very dress she claimed she wore exclusively for him. His hand was suspiciously close to her waist. However, it wasn't the image itself that delivered the crushing blow. It was the caption, "For the nights we'll never have to explain." She thought it would remain private. She thought he would never see it, but he did. And he guarded this discovery carefully, like an unhealing wound he dared not reveal to others. Sinking back onto the bench, his gaze was involuntarily drawn to the photo, which he automatically zoomed in on until the image dissolved into a pixelated mess. The cinematic rage, the loud shouts, the violent altercations, the dramatic exits. He didn't feel any of that. Instead, there was only an overwhelming weariness from having to beg for paltry crumbs of attention, from constantly playing "I'm fine," content with being a backup option in his own relationship. Suddenly, his phone flashed, signaling a new message. "Lenora, where did you disappear to?" the text read. No answer followed. "Lenora, you put me in an awkward position." He merely blinked, staring at the screen. "Ryan said you're acting like a child. We wanted you to join us." Join them on his own date? It was at this exact moment that the realization hit him. The problem wasn't Ryan, or at least, not solely Ryan. The problem was that she saw him as someone who would never leave. She felt that no matter how many boundaries she crossed, he would remain, because he was too gentle, too patient, too quiet. And perhaps there was some truth to that. Until this very moment. And so, he replied, "You made your choice. Tomorrow, I'm coming for my things. No question marks, no please. There would be no more attempts to salvage what was built on such a shaky foundation." Then he turned off his phone. The night was sleepless. He lay on his friend's couch, staring at the ceiling, fan casting whimsical shadows on the wall, his mind replaying the moments he had allowed events to unfold. Moments he'd convinced himself he was overreacting. Moments he'd believed her when she said, "You're just imagining things." But not anymore. The next morning, when he arrived at her apartment, something entirely unexpected happened. The door was already open, and inside stood Ryan with a radiant smile. He froze on the doorstep. The door to Lenora's apartment was ajar just enough to allow a glimpse inside, revealing Ryan. He was alone, or at least appeared to be at first glance. Ryan casually leaned against the kitchen counter, one ankle crossed over the other, slowly sipping from a mug that clearly wasn't his. It featured a cartoon octopus, Lenora's favorite character, which she'd bought during their trip to Monterey, the very trip where she'd talked about wanting to build a future together. Ryan looked up and, seeing him, merely smirked, neither surprised nor alarmed, as if he'd been expecting his arrival. "Oh, hey," he said, tilting the mug. "Didn't think you'd be here so early." Stepping cautiously over the threshold, he surveyed the room. Lenora was nowhere in sight, yet her purse lay carelessly tossed on the sofa. By the door, as always, were her favorite shoes, which she invariably kicked off the moment she stepped inside. All of this unequivocally pointed to her presence somewhere nearby. Perhaps she was showering, or worse, locked in the bedroom with him. Striving to maintain an unruffled tone, he asked, "Where is she?" Ryan merely shrugged in response, feigning ignorance of the gravity of the situation. She said she needed some time to compose herself. "She's been crying all morning. You really hurt her yesterday." Hearing this, he could barely suppress a sarcastic laugh. He hurt her. He looked at this man, this uninvited guest who had been circling their relationship for years like a predatory bird, waiting for the opportune moment, and he couldn't fathom how he had allowed it to continue for so long. "I'm here for my things," he said dryly, striving for composure. Ryan remained unmoving, calmly sipping his drink. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked, as if doubting his decision. At that moment, a chilling realization pierced him. This man wasn't just here to offer emotional support. He hadn't simply spent the night on her couch after their breakup. He stood there utterly relaxed, as if he were the master of this house, while he, the actual owner, was the uninvited guest. In the entryway, leaning against the closet, was his travel bag, a charger plugged into the outlet, and a hoodie, clearly not his, carelessly tossed on the armrest of the sofa. How long had he been holding court here? Before he could utter another word, Lenora materialized in the doorway, like a shadow. She was wearing a man's shirt, clearly not his. She flinched when she saw him. Her reddened eyes and chapped lips spoke of recent tears that seemed not yet fully dried. "Daryl," she began, taking a step toward him. He held up a hand to stop her. "Don't bother." Her lips trembled, trying to find the right words, the correct angle to present what had happened. However, whatever scenario she was replaying in her mind crumbled the moment their gazes met. "I'm here for my things," he repeated, this time louder and more confidently. Ryan shifted his gaze from her to him. "No need to make a scene. We're all adults here. We can talk calmly." It was at this very moment that something inside the narrator shifted. He realized this wasn't just betrayal, but the epitome of presumption. They expected no repercussions, believing he would simply nod, accept everything as it was, and perhaps even apologize for the inconvenience. Slowly and deliberately, he stepped forward and retrieved an envelope from his coat pocket. They both stared at him, as if expecting to see a weapon. Instead, he extended the envelope to Ryan, sliding it across the counter without a glance. "Give this to her," he said. "And don't worry, it's not a letter bomb, just the truth, which neither of you are accustomed to." Then he turned to Lenora. "You won't have to worry about me anymore. You made your choice. Just make sure he's around when it's his turn to get bored." He left without waiting for her response. The envelope contained no farewell letter or list of accusations, but merely a printed photograph from their shared album with a single line written in red ink. "For the nights we'll never have to explain. Until now." It seemed as though this story had reached its conclusion, yet the following morning brought with it a new shock. An anonymous email appeared in his inbox, containing just one phrase. "Check his phone records. You should know who he was calling while she was with you." This message, devoid of subject or signature, felt like an icy wind piercing his soul. It sounded like a dangerous lure, something best ignored to avoid inevitable pain. But curiosity, fueled by paranoia, proved too strong. Various scenarios involuntarily began to arise in his mind before he managed to halt the flood of thoughts. The problem was that accessing Ryan's phone records was impossible. No relationship granted him such a right, but suddenly a memory surfaced. Months ago, Lenora had used their shared Wi-Fi password to help Ryan set up a streaming app on his tablet. Back then, driven by paranoid thoughts, he had created a local account on their router to track connected devices. That access had never been deleted. His instinct for self-preservation in security matters proved useful. Logging into the router portal, he discovered that Ryan's device, identified as Rise iPad Pro, automatically connected to the network every time he was near the house, even after he had supposedly left, even last night. An analysis of the connected sessions revealed a strange pattern. Every time Lenora was supposedly with him, late evenings or on date nights when she claimed she wanted to go to bed early, Ryan's device connected to the Wi-Fi between 11:00 p.m. and 2:00 a.m. This happened regularly, predictably, as if on an intimate schedule. Then came the discovery that froze his blood. On one of those nights, specifically the one when Lenora had cancelled a planned weekend trip, citing illness, the logs recorded outgoing calls to a third-party call forwarding application. The numbers remained hidden, but the service was familiar. It was used to mask calls across different devices and store voicemails if they weren't deleted. This became the next step. Carefully examining old backups and folders in their shared cloud storage, he discovered an automatically synchronized audio file dated 2 months prior. Pressing the play button, he nearly dropped his phone. Ryan's voice said, "She's in the shower. No, she doesn't know I'm calling. She still thinks I'm seducing her." "I'll get the video. Don't worry. Just make sure she never sees the bank transfer. I've got her wrapped around my finger. She thinks it's love." A silence followed. He had to sit down to keep his balance. This wasn't just infidelity, not just emotional manipulation. Ryan was conspiring with someone else. It was unknown who this person was, what video was being discussed, or what money was being hidden. But it became clear that this wasn't about love, or even lust. This was a carefully planned setup. The protagonist replayed the recording again and again, striving to catch elusive details, a barely discernible noise resembling the sound of a television from an adjacent room, provided no concrete information. At that moment, Celeste's name surfaced in his memory. They hadn't spoken since she posted that video. Without losing a second, he texted her, asking if she had ever heard Ryan talk about a third party or matters related to money. The response was immediate. His phone rang. "I was waiting for you to discover this," she said, without a greeting. "You knew?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I sensed he was hiding something, but I had no idea of the scale of his dealings," she replied. "The day we broke up, he was on the phone with someone named Carson. I don't know who that is, but Ryan sounded scared, as if he owed him something." The protagonist's mind reeled. Carson. That name rang a bell. And then he remembered Lenora's former colleague, a guy from her previous office who had been quietly fired. The reason was the misuse of company funds. Lenora had once mentioned him in passing, chuckling as if it were a ridiculous joke. She said he was the type who talked fast and disappeared even faster. Now, everything fell into place. Ryan was entangled in some dark affair with Carson, and Lenora, it seemed, had become an unwitting pawn, or, even worse, an accomplice, unaware of the dangerous game she had gotten herself into. The protagonist no longer had the desire to save her, but he couldn't turn away either. He gathered all the files, screenshots, and recordings he possessed, copied them onto a USB drive, and anonymously mailed them to her office. No note, no signature, just the inscription on the envelope. The truth, before it consumes you too. The protagonist thought this was the end, but he clearly underestimated Lenora. At their next meeting, there was no trace of tears on her face. Instead, a seething rage simmered, and she hadn't come alone. When the protagonist opened the door, he expected a heart-breaking scene, a flood of tears, but he certainly didn't expect to see Lenora on his doorstep, accompanied by a man in a sharp, dark grey suit. Lenora held a folder in her hands, as if it were a crushing, unbearable weight. She remained silent, simply piercing the protagonist with her gaze, her lips tightly pressed, as if afraid words would betray her. The protagonist, arms crossed over his chest, waited in silence. Finally, Lenora spoke, her voice muffled. "I know it was you who sent the envelope, the records, the logs." The protagonist neither confirmed nor denied her words. Then the man standing beside Lenora stepped forward. "My name is David Landry. I'm a private investigator. Miss Brock hired me last week because she suspected there was more to this story than Ryan ever told. And she was right." He extended the folder to the protagonist. "We were able to establish that the person Ryan was working with is Carson Vellum, currently under investigation for corporate fraud, money laundering, and identity manipulation. Your audio recording helped connect everything. Lenora's accounts were used covertly as transit accounts without her knowledge. She was simply set up." The protagonist shifted his gaze to Lenora. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from deep internal pain, resignation, fear, and a glimmer of strength breaking through months of deception. "I didn't come here to accuse you," she said, her voice trembling. "I came to thank you. I didn't expect this, didn't see it, didn't want to see it. When you left, I thought I had won, that Ryan and I were finally free from judgment. But he wasn't with me. He was just using me." She lowered her gaze to her hands. Her voice trembled. "I was furious when I opened that envelope. I wanted to destroy it, to pretend it was fake, But you left with dignity, Daryl, and you left the truth. The protagonist didn't know what to say. For the first time in all this time, he felt he had nothing to prove. Lenora took a step back. I'm leaving town. New job, different state. I need to recover legally, emotionally, in every way. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I finally understood what I lost. The protagonist nodded slightly. I hope you find peace. After they left, in the quiet of his apartment, the protagonist sat on the sofa where he once sought solace, contemplating the reasons for the breakup. However, this time, he wasn't tormented by doubts or self-flagellation. He felt an extraordinary lightness, as if purified in the flames of his experiences. Weeks passed in silence, without calls or messages, which brought a sense of freedom. Gradually, the world around him began to regain its colors. The protagonist started taking morning walks, reconnecting with friends he had distanced during his previous relationship. He even pulled an old camera from the shelf, one he hadn't touched in years. It felt as though he was truly breathing for the first time. One Saturday morning, he was photographing in the park when a stranger approached him with a curious smile. "You're in my shot," he said, half joking, pointing to the lens. The girl chuckled in response. "Then you better make sure I turned out well." A casual conversation ensued. Her name was Alice. She was a graphic designer and a dog lover. She didn't have a best friend named Ryan, unlike last time. Their interaction was filled with genuine laughter, honest words, and a tranquility the protagonist hadn't experienced in an eternity. They exchanged phone numbers, and this time he felt no urge to justify his past. He no longer felt broken, but ready for a new relationship. Perhaps a broken heart doesn't always lead to revenge or grand fireworks. Sometimes the strongest act is choosing oneself and taking a courageous step into the unknown with a clear understanding of what will never again be acceptable.